Brief disclaimer, this second episode of our US election special will be available in English only. And for German listeners, wir werden mit einem US Election Spezial-Podcast zum Ergebnis der Wahl am nächsten Mittwoch zu unserem normalen deutschen Ausstrahlungsprogramm zurückkehren.
Des Pudels Kern, der Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the second special episode of this Pudels Kern, our very special episode in English today, talking about the US election, which is actually 5 days out from today, so quite close. The excitement is rising, at least for me. And it definitely also is one of the spookiest episodes that we ever did at this Pudels Kern because it's Halloween today, and it might be very spooky next Tuesday as well.
Yes, welcome to this spooky Halloween special on the US elections part 2. I have to admit, I'm not as excited about it, and I'll come probably back to it later, but I see that my two colleagues definitely are. Marko Tokic, my name, from London, and I'm really looking forward to this.
And my name, Leo Mengel. I'm the last one calling in from Chicago, and the heat is on. We are on the last meters to the election. You've actually asked me last episode actually whether I notice anything like, reference to elections in my everyday life. Like before, not so much. This has changed now. So Chicago is more in election vibe. So you started actually 1 week ago seeing more and more, posters popping up, or, the Make America Great Again hats. Yeah, is getting intense. And that's why I think our episode before the election is at the perfect time right now.
Yes, so the elections are coming closer and closer, and the polls are still a toss-up, and still it feels like it's a never-ending set of crazy statements, strange campaigning, I have to admit, and a political culture that is, let's say, rather odd. But this is by far not the strangest presidential election of all times. The United States have an actually really impressive historical record in this regard. So, for example, in 1872, incumbent Ulysses Grant had an easy run for a second term. Quite frankly, because his opponent died before the final votes were cast. So he won with 286 votes versus Greeley's, the name of the contestant, 66 elections after election day. But the problem was that his candidate, or his, let's say, opponent, passed away. So interestingly, quite remarkably, this is the only case where a presidential candidate died before the election was finalized. And let's hope everybody stays well until the elections. I don't want to see the drama. Anyways, but when we look in more modern times, there is an election that, to a really weird extent, I would say, at least resembles this contest that we are having coming up on Tuesday. So a charismatic candidate that does not feel like a politician managed to beat an incumbent. That incumbent was not initially planned to be the candidate of the Democratic Party and had a rather unexpected jump into it, although he was the president before that. And the outsider uses a difficult situation in the Middle East to show the incapability of the incumbent. A Cold War is reheating up following an invasion in Afghanistan? No, I'm seriously not talking about 2024, but about the presidential election in 1980, and the charismatic candidate was not Donald Trump, but the former actor Ronald Reagan, who generated an unseen landslide for the Republicans. And it's interesting, because they're both Republicans, they're both different, but despite a very dramatic difference in obvious political appearance, the situation is remarkably similar. And we'll come to that today, because part 2 is a bit different from part 1. Policy-wise, they have some interesting similarities to which we'll come. Anyways, before I start, first of all, the question, are you guys excited that Tuesday is the big day, or are you just happy that it's over?
I probably wasn't excited last time we talked, but the polls are still so very unclear. I think it's going to be a really interesting night on Tuesday, hopefully, if all the polls are being done properly and the vote counting is happening on the day for many states. So, yeah, I'm quite looking forward to it, to see what the campaigns also can bring to the actual voter share in the final event. And I'm surprisingly not really frightened somehow. I don't know. I'm not that emotionally attached to the US, which might be a bit short-sighted, being that the EU is quite closely connected to US policies and US economics. But yeah, it's definitely one of the more exciting elections in my lifetime, I think. And probably the first one I'll follow very closely, even more closely than the ones I participated in Germany, perhaps.
Yeah, actually, same applies to me. And I'm being quite honest. Like, I think for me, it's not just being excited, but I'm nervous. So I'm really scared of what can happen next week. And I mean, I don't want to be the prophet of doom here, but I think we all should prepare for the scenarios that could emerge from whatever is actually going to be the result of this election, and is actually something I do not feel so much in the US here on the street. And this is something that really worries me. So as I said, like, these political symbolism actually increased over the last days. The Make America Great Again caps. But, like, I don't feel there's a big change in the discourse of the Americans, that they would, debate, argue more about politics. Is quite the opposite. So whenever you try raising the election or, try to discuss political things, they really block it. And you got the feeling they try sitting out the result of this election. And I think this is fatal, because whatever comes, especially if there's a narrow win for either candidate, it might get nasty. And then I think Americans and also we Europeans should be prepared actually, like, to argumentatively basically defend the democracy, because this is, what is at stake, to be honest.
I can see why you would be more nervous sitting in the lion's den right there in the US. You're basically having the first impact right in front of your house door. I think it's a little bit different for us Europeans right now.
Yeah, I have to admit, I would say the UK is a bit over-obsessed with the US. I know they have this special relationship, they speak the same language, they consume very similar media, and still, I can't wait for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday just to get over with it and get on to other important topics that are happening out there. We just had the new budget coming out. And still, we always talk about what Donald Trump, J.D. Vance and Kamala Harris are saying, and it's just getting a bit annoying. I know the relevance of it. I'm very well aware of it. But election time is a very long period of time, especially when you consider that it all starts a year before, when they decide who the candidate is going to be, and so on and so forth. So it feels really like a marathon.
Marco, but I don't want to take your illusion, but the election is on Tuesday night or Tuesday evening here in the US, but is not going to be over by Wednesday. And my prophecy, it's actually not going to be over by the end of next week. So we will have like a hanging result until the very last ballots are casted and counted, because this, especially in states like Pennsylvania, which plays a crucial role, is going to take a couple of days at least. And then, as I said, like, what is as crucial as the election itself is to see the reaction of both candidates. Of one candidate, I have less doubt that is going to be a problem. Of the other, I'm not so sure. But actually, let's come to this point right now, like, just to give a brief overview where we're standing in terms of the polls. So as of right now, we're talking on the 31st of October. There are, of course, already a significant amount of polls casted. So we're talking about maybe 60 million of US Americans already voting right now, or already voted by mail. But like, how is the situation in the battleground states? So Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Nevada, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan.
Yeah, well, as we said, it is a toss-up. And the problem with the US election system is that every state has different rules. And very different rules apply that involves how actually things get counted. So in some cases, the ballots can be opened up in advance. In some, they have to wait until the day when the actual normal elections are taking place, so the Tuesday. It is very, very difficult to say. And some actually states are where you can actually vote in advance. But in many cases, you can't. So in many cases, most people will vote on the day itself, which will lead to this weird situation that maybe it's the weather in one area that will decide how things go. But the polls themselves look a bit in, let's say for us, maybe not the most fortunate direction. So especially the betting odds are saying that Donald Trump is clearly in the lead. I'm not too sure what to make of that, because there's no rumors that certain people who are attached to Trump are particularly into that. So I'm not sure how to read this. On the other hand, the polls, what the pollsters themselves are doing, are looking more towards a Trump win as well. But the scenarios are all very, very close. So it's still a toss-up. It's still all within the statistical margin of error.
Yeah, I'll just open up the latest New York Times polling, and basically what Marco said is very true. 48% for both candidates overall still, so very even. But that might also be different in other polling models. And if we're looking at the different swing states, actually 5 states to 1 for Trump that are currently going to him. The only one that Harris is predicted to win is Michigan at the moment. Arizona seems to be quite clearly going into Trump's favor, as well as Georgia. And the other ones are plus 1 point, so not really that strong in their opinion, basically. So as we all said last time, again, it's going to be incredibly close. And yeah, let's see who has the best models. And let's hope that some of them are actually predicting what is actually happening on Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. As you said, I mean, at the end, like being close, the election is the definition of a swing state. But if we look at particularly 2 swing states like Pennsylvania and North Carolina, for example, these are, I would predict, the 2 battleground states, and there it's really 50-50. And what is more worrying, I think, for the Harris campaign is that she had a small lead of 1 to 2 percentage points, which now shrunk down basically. And it seems that like the amount of voters that are still undecided and, like potentially mobilizable by both campaigns is very small. So basically, like you hear from the Harris campaign that they're going around knocking on the doors, but actually out of 10 doors they knock on, like 8 have already made up their minds, and the rest of the 2 are actually not convincible. And this is a big problem, right? Like these, the leverage they could still pull at this stage, I think it is very small. As I said, most of the people have already made up their mind. We had one event at the beginning of the week which was potentially able to change the situation in Pennsylvania, where in the Madison Square Garden in New York, the Republican candidate Donald Trump actually hold a speech, and along with other Republican figures, and one comedian actually on the stage was more or less gossiping about the Puerto Rican U.S. Americans, making fun of the island being garbage in the waters before in front of America. And this might sound like just one misplaced sentence. In reality, actually, this speaks to a huge community of Puerto Rican in the U.S. and also actually just in Pennsylvania, we are talking about many thousand Puerto Rican, which are actually able to make the difference in this very, very contested state. So there are more Puerto Ricans there than the difference in voting polls actually predicts at the moment. So this might be decisive at the very end. But it's also the fact that it might not convince all of the Puerto Rican really that Donald Trump is not doing policy in their favor, because he did similar statements, or the Republicans did similar statements in the past, and this always this didn't prove to really convince them not to vote for Donald Trump, and that's why I'm actually suspicious that it's going to change anything.
Yes, but I mean, I've a few thoughts when I hear this. I mean, first of all, it's very idiosyncratic in a way, because as I said, the margins are very, very small, which means, in other words, that very minor and very tiny events actually can make a difference and will make a difference. For me, the most relevant one, I would say, is actually, first of all, will it rain or not? I mean, that is a thing already in European countries, let alone the US. When it rains, people don't like going actually to vote, just because it takes some effort, it's rainy, it's not nice outside, you have to go to this place where you have to submit your vote. Not very interesting. And that means actually usually that in countries where people are, let's say, on the border between being A, not particularly interested, and B, also being on the fence well, when it comes to the candidates, might actually go vote or not go vote. And that is a very interesting and very important group. And that is the group both campaigns are targeting right now. So I'm not entirely sure whether it's actually as controllable, and especially these people, I'm not sure if they show up in the polls properly. So I'm not sure what we're measuring there and whether we're measuring these people. That's why I don't take too much. I don't put too much weight on these like polls that are super tight. Whether they're tight, in my opinion, it is a toss-up. No matter if it's +1 or -1 or 0, it's all within this kind of margin of error, especially because of these strange effects.
Just quickly on the polling, because that's, I think, the definition of a poll, right? You have decided voters, and that's the ones that are making up your poll, and the undecided voters, you usually use a model to predict which side they're going to vote on, and this is mostly without any good assumptions behind it, because you can't really tell, or you do not count them. So actually the people we are talking about that will be decided in this election are the ones that are making up like 2 or 4% of the electorate, depending on the situation. And I'd say, to Leo's point, that even the Puerto Ricans probably have like 48% or like 90% of voters have decided their candidate already, making his statements about the Puerto Rican island of trash, while obviously quite dumb in the end, quite naive to put something out like this in front of the vote on Tuesday. I don't think it will have a lot of an effect, because the people that are already decided for Trump will not be discouraged by such a statement. Perhaps there will be 1 or 2 from the undecided that go to Kamala Harris's camp, but I don't know. I don't think that these things matter as much as all the other sort of anchoring factors around the actual election day that Marco just described.
Yes, but I would say that the Madison Square Garden event it in itself is actually very remarkable. First of all, it's historically very problematic, given that in the 1930s there was a very, let's say, problematic event back then there, where there was kind of a Nazi rally exactly in the same venue. So people were drawing some sort of parallels, which I feel personally a bit uneasy about. But it certainly is, let's say, an interesting decision, interesting choice. It was certainly not purely by, let's say, coincidence. The other thing that we have to say is that there was an incredible number of supporters going there. So when we talk of people, we're not talking about this comedian who's apparently not very famous, but can make a good living off his rather weird stand-up comedy. But there were also people like Elon Musk again, showing up there, holding a rather not very enlightening speech, I would say, and many other supporters, Vivek Ramaswamy and other candidates. And it was really about that, showing kind of a united front, showing like in these last meters that you have many supporters, many people bring you forward. And I think that is a really interesting point, that you can see that they really kind of create these large-scale events. On the other hand, the Democrats did something similar. There, for example, Beyoncé was making her big effort to bring people to vote.
Yeah, I mean, at the very end of the day, like both camps actually try to portray these identification figures, if you want, right? Like also Arnold Schwarzenegger, who actually committed to voting for Harris just a couple of days ago. Like, you know, each of these figures actually speaks to a certain audience, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger to the classical white man in the US, and maybe Beyoncé or like Taylor Swift to a more younger audience. But I think one of the big mistakes we are frequently making again in Europe is that we think it's really divided across, you know, like either occupational or educational or ethnic borders, like whom you're voting for. And this is really not the case anymore. So as we said in the last episode, one of the big problems of Kamala Harris is actually like that the support of Latino voters is decreasing. And I heard several interviews, for example, of Cuban Latinos that actually believed and strongly believed, if you listen to them, that Kamala Harris is a communist. Right. The other day I was talking with Willie. He's facility manager here at the University of Chicago and Afro-American. And he said there's no way he's going to vote for any of the two candidates because none of them actually changed his situation, like his day-to-day situations, right? They promised, and he referred probably to the Democrats, they promised everything, you know, but he said it's more about ideational, is more about, you know, like, figurative, you know, language stuff, but really like improvements in his life he couldn't observe. And I think this is something that the Democrats actually should be really worried about, that in their stronghold groups, let's say, they are not able to mobilize the voters anymore. And also, if you look at the share of African American men, it's rising in favor of the Trump campaign. All these indicators do not point in a very good direction for the Democrats, and this is really worrying me, because on the other hand, Trump's rhetoric is getting more and more misogynist, more and more racist, and some even say more and more fascist. So there was, for example, General John F. Kelly, who actually defined Donald J. Trump as a fascist earlier this week, and the fact that this doesn't have an effect on his voter base, this is really worrisome.
Yeah, I think it has a few sources in here. I mean, let's be honest, still the Democrats have a clear lead among college-educated people. They still have a lead among women, so among ethnic minorities. These things are still existent. It's the gap that is shrinking, and that is something they need to be concerned about. They're still in the lead in these groups. It's not like they've completely lost Latino voters, for example. So not to make things here a bit more unclear than it is. But probably very worrying, at least for me personally, it is. I think is this kind of rhetoric, not only that it got more fascist or not fascist. I personally don't like this word because it can, in the American context, it means something very different than the European, which is why I'm not entirely keen on it. But I would say it's, first of all, very chaotic. I mean, let's be honest, at the end of the day, nobody really knows what Donald Trump wants. One day he says one thing, the other day says the other thing, and we will come later also to policy. It's altogether a complete mess. He talks about certain things, the next day he'll say something completely different. And the problem, at least for people who vote for him, is everybody can reflect something on him. And if they find something that they find of kind of an aspect of him that they find interesting, funny, appealing, they can actually stick to that. It doesn't matter what he'll say tomorrow or the day after, because he created this incredible, let's say, figure of him being so multifaceted that it doesn't really matter. If you see one side of him that you find interesting, you'll stick to him. And it's definitely a phenomenal campaign in this regard, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I think Marcus pointed on the difference in understanding between European and American sort of view on the word fascism and being a fascist is quite interesting, because as Europeans, we naturally connect this to the Third Reich and Adolf Hitler and basically the whole 1930s and 1940s that happened here on the continent, which were quite clearly structured authoritarianism on the far right of the spectrum, outright racist, of course, as well. And what is not so clear from his policies is that there's one, targeted plan of things he wants to do, right? So there's not a clear concept of whatever he wants to try to suppress in when he's in power. There are sort of plans around switching out institutions, getting rid of the big state, as he's calling it, or the deep state, and sort of replacing people that are in there, which are quite clearly leaning toward a fascist view, but sort of in the extremist definition that we mostly use in Europe for that word. I don't think it's perfectly fitting from a sort of American perspective. I think it's actually quite a good description of what his policies are aiming to do.
Excuse me, Philip. Actually, I think I have to interrupt, because I think what is also naive is this way of thinking about Donald Trump. I think it is a way which I would like to see him, as this crazy egomaniac who's out there, just talking one thing one day, then another thing the other day. I think this is not true anymore. Maybe if at any time it was like that, 4 or 5 years ago, I think it's not true. What he says, he means it like that. And I think this is the biggest threat and the biggest worry I have right now, because if you talk to the Trump voters, actually, I think 67% of them are going to say, do you know what? I don't really like that guy. He comes up with these things that are just, that they don't speak to me. It's just too fascist, whatever, too much. But then, in some other points, he's actually making a good point, and that's why I vote for him. So actually, you have the situation that people pick the things they like, but the big narratives, they don't buy. They say, well, we just don't believe in his threats, right? These are big threats, like deploying the National Guards against enemies from within. That's what he said the other day. Or, deporting immigrants and taking the FBI out of the Justice Department, actually. This is one of his plans, and making it directly reporting to the White House. Like for the Germans among us, this should ring a bell, reference to Gestapo in the Third Reich. And, this is the big problem, that people think, this is never gonna happen. It's just too big. And now actually, I give you one example. I give you one quote, and you got to tell me, from whom this quote actually is. The most colossal lies are the ones most likely to be believed by the people. Why? Because the people would not believe that somebody could have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. From whom is this quote?
Are there any options?
I'm actively illiterate in this regard, so I'm very happy to pass this.
Give us A, B, and C options.
Well, there's actually just one answer. It's from Adolf Hitler in his book Mein Kampf, 1925. And in my opinion, it's exactly what is repeating itself. These huge threats, they are too huge to be believed, is the concept of big lie. Everybody can Google it and read the reference in Mein Kampf himself. I don't want to advertise this book here, but I think it's important actually to be aware of the historical dimension of it. And for me, the question is just in case Donald Trump would be elected next week, would he be able to rule as a fascist in the US? Or are the US institutions still strong enough actually to keep him in check?
The point I was trying to make is not that it's not a very certain risk of him becoming a president that will turn America into a fascist country, because I do believe that it is a true risk. I was just trying to make a point that the European understanding of fascism might be slightly different from the one that we have in the US. And I agree, he has sort of very rough ideas or big picture ideas about what's going to happen. As you said, deportations of immigrants, using military force within the country, shutting the borders down completely, also in an economic and sort of diplomatic sense to other countries. What I'm not seeing is, and maybe he's not sharing it, I'm not seeing a concrete plan to actually go from the current state of the US to that state of the US. So I'm not the biggest expert in sort of US institutional policies, and I don't know how much he will actually be able to do, but my belief in US institutions at the moment is greater than my fear of Donald Trump becoming president.
But what more of a plan do you want as Project 2025? It's actually lined up, on every page how he wants to reform American administration.
That's the reform plan, but that's not how you get there, right? You can't replace all of the civil servants at once. You can't just do that. It's not a feasible thing to do operationally in practice. So I'm not seeing how sort of the effect of Gleichschaltung that we had in the rise of the Third Reich in Germany in the 1930s. So the concept of using all the institutions in the US and switching them to the same propaganda message. I can't see how this is happening, to be quite honest, because I still believe that we have enough good people, in a way, in these institutions, and some very strong sort of policy and legal restrictions on what can each individual person do, that we are not seeing this transition. And I agree also that Project 2025 is obviously a blueprint, but it's a blueprint of a sort of final state, not of the transition into that final state.
I'll bring in two things. So first of all, sometimes I'm a bit surprised that people actually believe this can be so easily done, because there's large legal debates in the US on the questions what a president can do and what he's not able to do, and especially what his executive powers or her executive powers really are. And that's going to be a topic quite likely, because none of the winners is very likely going to have both houses. So they will, in order to pass really many things, they will have to rely on these kind of executive powers. And how they exactly set up is going to be a long legal dispute that's awaiting us in the upcoming years. So I'm not entirely sure how quickly Donald Trump, even if he wanted to, if he was able to, how quickly he would actually be able to promote this. But you started now with this Project 2025. Would any of you guys actually try to introduce it to our listeners, actually what this project really is about?
I think it's sort of a thing about many things, and the biggest takeaway from me, I haven't read it, but I've read some articles and listened to some podcasts about it. Basically, it's the idea that the current civil service in the US is unfit to service for a presidency under a right Republican candidate, which is obviously Trump. It is not written by the Trump campaign, but by a think tank that's quite close to it, I believe, and sort of a 150-page document. And the main thing basically is that they want to switch out the civil servants that are currently in the US institutions with the ones that have been trained beforehand by sort of the organization that wrote this document, and therefore to ensure that which is the hypothesis, that the left-leaning sort of wokeness that is inherent in the current US institutions goes away, and we have a proper, whatever that means, right-wing government once again, which they describe as neutral and open to any ideas from every political sector, which in the end obviously is not true, because this quite clearly just turns the institutions toward whatever the president wants. And that's what I said when I meant that, yes, this is clearly a blueprint of how the final state of US could look like, but I can't see how you actually do it operationally. And I have, as I said, still a strong belief in the institutions of the US.
Yeah, like your belief in the American institutions, in all honor, and also me, I think it's a very strong democracy, yet I observe that, step by step, several bricks of this wall are or have been taken out already. Bricks were 10 years ago, I would have thought these are very solid bricks. And just to give you two examples. The first example is that Trump actually successfully undermines the legitimacy of the vote itself. This is nothing new. We saw this for 4 years ago. But right now, actually, they are even better prepared. So they are filing lawsuits in contested swing states, in counties, actually, in preparation, basically. So they want to have an excuse in case of a small margin Harris win to say, okay, we have said this from the very beginning. Like, if you look at the White House, you would actually not be able to get anywhere near close because they've built up a great fence, basically, around the White House, allegedly, for the grandstand of the inauguration day, like in January 20th. At the end, it is a preparation for any form of civil war that might happen. The chances are, I think, still low, but, like, they are bracing themselves for the situation that US Americans are not going to believe in the outcome of the vote. And this is one first step, one brick which is missing in the wall. The second brick actually is the media. If you look at it, actually, it was just also earlier this week that the LA Times and the Washington Post, just as a reminder, two of the three biggest US newspapers, and the Washington Post being Jeff Bezos owned, they decided not to endorse Harris anymore. So basically,
not to endorse Harris at all. They haven't endorsed anyone before. So it's basically just not endorsing anyone.
Well, not endorsing anymore in a sense that, like, the years before, they always, set out like an official endorsement for either candidate. And several questions emerge. First of all, of course, why does the second richest man in the world own the Washington Post at all, like a allegedly neutral medium? The second, why do newspapers give voting recommendations? But the most important question, why does he actually decide not to back any of the two camps, while I think maybe 80-90% of his subscribers are actually pro-Democrat? And it basically signals to me that Donald Trump is already successfully undermining the legitimacy of the media and making, like, the biggest media houses actually bend their knee in front of him. And, just imagine right now he isn't even elected yet, like how this is going to be, like, if he's going to be the president of the US.
Yeah, it's also not surprising that Jeff Bezos is pulling the endorsement of Kamala Harris from the papers, because at the same time he did that, he arguably also had a meeting with Trump on potential future contracts for his space company, Blue Origin, that were probably promised to him. So he just doesn't want to endanger his economic foundation of the company if Trump becomes president, which I'd actually put this the other way around. It is sort of frightening to see that a US president is willing to bribe the electorate in a way right before the election as Donald Trump is, because usually you wouldn't really make deals about when you're in power with some companies in private. But that's the current political climate we have. And in regards to the institutional argument, I think there's still two major points that uphold my belief. The first one is that actually we have some convictions on Donald Trump and felony crimes being issued before the election. Arguably doesn't make a change in voter sort of belief in him, which is sad to see, but it isn't really an institutional problem. It's more of a societal problem. And secondly, I also believe that while Donald Trump certainly undermined the election result by sort of spreading doubt in the voters, the institutions itself that counted the vote were very clear and very certain, even in those states that had actual Republican governors overseeing the elections. So if you remember back in 2021, there was, I think, the case of Georgia, where Trump basically tried to call the governor to say, hey, please do not count these votes or make them count for me or whatever, we need the numbers. And the guy refused despite being Republican. So that's sort of what I meant when I talked about institutions, but I fully agree that the societal sort of component from media and belief in election processes is definitely taking a hit.
Yeah, and he's not the only one, I would say, who falls under that group. So if we think again of Elon Musk, Mr. Twitter, Mr. SpaceX, Mr. Tesla, I mean, it is not entirely unlikely to consider that Trump has some sort of hand on him as well. Let's be honest, he's allegedly at least a big holder of cryptocurrencies, where Trump has kind of a soft spot for. Then you have him also being actually a large, let's say, profiteer from government contracts, especially for SpaceX. It's now not incredibly difficult to imagine that there might be some sort of potential business, at least, that would come up in case of a Trump election. So I'm not entirely sure whether with Elon Musk it's really about the personal vendetta and his beliefs about Donald Trump and these kind of MAGA policies, or how he called himself the goth MAGA in New York recently. I sometimes have the feeling there are also very clear economic rationales behind it.
Yeah, especially considering that in the last Trump administration, Trump wasn't really closely related to his policies or even his sort of aura or persona. So he really changed his approach towards the Republicans and to Trump himself, which is, from my point of view, definitely purely business related, because in the end, Trump's policies promise sort of higher tariffs on Chinese products, which largely are electric cars in the future, and sort of secure the economic firepower that his free companies have in the US. So that's not really surprising. What is sort of perhaps the bigger impact of that is that business people in general look more towards Trump as the economically beneficial candidate overall, especially those business people that are sort of owning smaller to medium-sized companies that operate in the US solely and do not have sort of foreign exports coming in or are relying on imports from other countries. So, it could be very well that the endorsement of sort of the indirect endorsement of Jeff Bezos and the direct endorsement by Elon Musk really support the business community in voting for Trump.
Yeah, and actually I think the persona of Elon Musk combines many of these problems that we have identified with American democracy. You know, just starting with the fact that he is the owner of one of the biggest social media platforms, with X, basically, former Twitter. So just imagine like how much harm this actually does to the discourse, the political discourse, because at the end, X is not for the ordinary people. Mainly, is the elite of Washington discussing their academics, politicians. But of course, like the fact that he, as a well, I would say a classical narcissist controls this platform and actually controls like what is being censored, what is not being censored. It's a huge problem. So there are evidences that he actually asked like some of his employees to manipulate the algorithm such that his own posts are actually accelerated, whereas like other posts of the New York Times, for example, that were critical of the Trump campaign actually received surprisingly fewer shares or likes. So this on the end of this social media or the media in general, but also he really built upon the Trump narrative of the election being undermined. And actually in a interview with Tucker Carlson the other day, he was saying if Trump is not going to win the election, it'll be the last election that we have. So he's actually constructing it the other way around, saying like, in order to preserve democracy, vote for Trump, which of course doesn't make any sense. And on another front, he's also supporting and building upon the Trump narrative of undermining the vote basically itself by contributing $75 million to the Trump campaign in total, but in specific also running like a lottery where when you actually sign up for voting, you have the chance to win $1 million every day. So this is, of course, not how the founding fathers intended American democracy to work, but like what is really striking, if we're talking about all these people like surrounding Trump, like Musk, for example, the South American German entrepreneur Peter Thiel, these are all white men, and this is, I think, a bigger, broader problem that you see in U.S. politics, that actually there is something that is called the manosphere. So pretty much all white men, like dominating the Republican-led discourse. So also, if you don't think about entrepreneurs, there are many like just journalists or how do you call them? Opinion makers, like Ben Shapiro, Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, Canadian psychoanalyst, basically. And there is not much room for pluralism, or actually pluralism in terms of origin, but also pluralism in terms of opinions. And this is actually really worrying.
Two things. I mean, first of all, I have to admit that this kind of lottery story, and also they has like these options that everybody who basically brings somebody to register to vote gets money. That reminds me mostly of Balkan politics in Southeastern Europe, where this kind of approach is very common, and it's fortunately usually frowned upon, but unfortunately very, very common. So I have sometimes a feeling that the US, even though it's so rich and apparently so highly developed, sometimes acts like somebody who is not like this. Anyways, what is kind of interesting is, as you said, this kind of manosphere. I'm not sure if I could take it as a movement. I am a bit more unclear on that one. Because it consists of many different routes. So there are, first of all, these kind of group of people who just want to present the new manlyhood picture. They in themselves are usually not very political. So they're usually not particularly educated. Jordan Peterson is an interesting exception here. But they're usually like average educated. They want to present a healthy lifestyle for guys. They should be male. They should be very masculine. They need to dominate the women around them. It's pretty horrible as a life concept. And it's shockingly successful. But they in themselves are usually not very political. Let's be honest here. What is kind of interesting, though, is that Donald Trump, with his unusual media campaigning, and it's certainly unique, and I think has a lot to do with his kind of, let's say, kind of actor background. I mean, he had these TV shows where have The Apprentice and so on and so forth. He really understands how media works. He understood that he can use many of these people, many of these like symbols that are created in this kind of sphere to really cater to a very large group of people, especially young people who watch this a lot, who actually get very appealed by these kind of likes of Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate. They might not have much in common when you see them, when you hear them for the first time. But Donald Trump really understood that the kind of symbols, the kind of, let's say, ideas they bring over can be very, very useful for his kind of political campaigning. So in a way, it's probably a bit like the communist concept of the useful idiot here, really coming in, having these of people that can be very, very useful to, let's say, achieve my own political goals, no matter how much I care about them.
I think you can't really underestimate how many young people actually watch these kind of content creators. So while they might not be able to vote this time in the US election because they felt basically too young to actually do so, it's incentivizing weird political development within sort of the youth of the country in a way. So the follow-up candidate for the Republicans, it might be Trump again if he loses next year, but for the election in 2028 might then sort of reap the benefits of this campaigning that has been done quite intensely by the Republicans last year. But yeah, I'm not sure how much of an impact it has on this election.
Yeah, and actually, if you look at the discourse in this group, in this camp, it's literally exactly like a bubble. So is the left wing discourse in the US. Like this, we haven't talked about it, but it's exactly the same. But if we want to stay like with this Republican manosphere, one more second, like what these people and the supporters think that what is being shared on these platforms is like the pure, the crystalline truth. Basically, it doesn't come by chance that Trump's social media is called Truth Social. And actually one term that is around in this environment is red-pilled. What does it mean being red-pilled? Well, if you remember recast Matrix, right, there are two pills that are offered to the protagonist. There's the red pill, which actually allows the protagonist to see the harsh truth of reality. And there's a blue pill, which basically keeps him in a comfortable, illusory world, pretty much. It just happens to be like exactly the same colors of the American parties. But red pill actually is a metaphor for, being aware of the real problems, being woken up. And basically, it's a similar narrative if you look in Germany, for example, at the Querdenker, which is the anti-vax movement. They also claim the narrative, like, we know it, like you are just, following. We actually know the pure truth. And just a little side note, which I find really interesting, in this context, also the term woke has a completely different meaning than in Europe. Like for us, woke usually is identified with identity politics, being left-wing, being progressive. In the US, it's the exact opposite nowadays. So it has changed in a sense that being woke, being awake, means actually being red-pilled in a Republican sense, knowing exactly where the problems are. And those who are not woke are the ones that are sleeping, are the ones that are actually not up to date on our real problems that we face. And this bubble, one cannot actually call it otherwise, is really problematic because it actually makes for the polarization that we observe in the US.
Yes, but so I'm not entirely sure. I mean, in one way, JD Vance, so the running mate of Donald Trump, so remember that is like the vice presidential candidate. If Donald Trump gets elected, the idea is JD Vance becomes vice president, is kind of out of this manosphere. He caters very well to these people. And I'm not sure in hindsight whether this was a good idea, because Donald Trump knows how to play these people. He went recently on a podcast with Joe Rogan, who is like kind of a saint of this movement, if you want to say it this way, although he has really far. And in a way, still, I would say that Donald Trump himself didn't need such a candidate. And in hindsight, maybe it was a good idea in the long run that maybe JD Vance can one day take over, but I would say in hindsight, probably it was not the smartest idea to take somebody from a movement that I'm already catering to in advance.
To be honest, I don't agree with you. I think personally, JD Vance was an excellent choice from the perspective of Donald Trump. Why? Because I've watched the movie Hillbilly Elegy the other day, and it's for the listeners who do not know, it's basically based on a novel that was written by J.D. Vance himself, describing his life growing up in Ohio in really desolate conditions, to be honest, like in a marginalized family that used to be part of the American working class, now is not anymore. And in a sense, I feel like J.D. Vance embodies exactly this type of voter you want to address as Donald Trump. These voters in the Rust Belt, states like Ohio, like Michigan, that used to be proud, blue collar working class, people working in car factories, and now that all this has been marginalized, feeling like the American dream hasn't worked for them anymore. And what did J.D. Vance do? Like, he went out of these conditions to Yale, to law school there, and made a good career. And you can like him or not, you have to say he actually had a very impressive political career. And I think this is the reason many voters actually identify with him being one of us. He is the person that actually embodies like our ideals. He is there basically fighting for the rights of the marginalized. And in a sense, he's fulfilling exactly the same job, basically, like a Kamala Harris is doing for other voting groups, who are also claiming this is our representative figure to really, defend the rights of the others that have been marginalized by U.S. politics, U.S. economics. And I think in this regard, the problem is just that the system is not working for so many groups in the US, and that, in a sense, American voters have lost the belief in this system. And I think this is something that is worrying me most, because I cited in the other episode the Marist National poll that actually said that almost 50% of Americans are seeing the likelihood of a civil war breaking out in the US. The same poll actually concluded that more than 3/4 of Americans think that US democracy is currently under threat and that the system just doesn't work anymore. And I see striking parallels to what happened in 1989 with the fall of the Soviet Union. Why did it fall at the very end? It fell because the people, the citizens, did not believe in the inherent system and that this actually keeps on working. And I feel like, apart from all the constitutional barriers, the biggest problem is that if people don't believe that this system works anymore, then we do have a really big problem. And I see this for more and more Americans.
I probably put it even simpler, because I think the problem in the end is that bipartisanship has failed in the last 20 years of US politics. So in any case, it doesn't really matter who gets elected on Tuesday. The likelihood that the president will mostly cater to their voters with their policies and their sort of decisions in power is 80%, 90%, I don't know. There's basically a zero chance of actually getting through anything meaningful that will benefit all of Americans. It will be mostly targeted at those that sort of voted for you in the election. And the death of bipartisanship in sort of the chambers of the US has made it more or less impossible to actually bring forward any legislation that is helping a large number of American peoples. And yeah, I'm not really sure what to do about that, or how it came to be, or why it is actually that we have the situation right now. But yeah, I can't really see a way out of the situation without a major sort of reorientation of politics. And whether we like it or not, this reorientation is happening right now, and it's going even more strongly in the direction of non-bipartisan policies. If you look back in history, there were many sort of major decisions in the US that were taken by both sides of the party, right? So by both sides of the aisle, where everyone sort of agreed on a fundamental level on some of the basics that were in the law, in the brief that was being discussed in the chambers. And we've left that. We sort of discorrelated decision-making in policies with the content of the policies, and we connected it more or less with the parties and sort of what the party believes and what the party core voters believe. And that's, first of all, pretty sad, and I can't see a way out of that right now in the current electoral climate.
Yeah, probably the saddest thing at the end of the day is there's literally no realistic, serious policy that can improve people's life for better or for worse. I mean, no matter what comes out, at the end of the day, who will be really catered to are the big donors. That can actually differ from group to group. Some actually hedge and actually give money to both, so they're sure this is going to be fine. But let's be honest, either the policies that really would change people's life for better or for worse are unrealistic, or they're just completely out of any, let's say, current debate.
Well, then this has been actually quite a depressing episode, but still I would like to make one round of asking you, like, of course, like, how are you gonna spend the election night next Tuesday? Are you gonna follow the election? And of course, like, what is your guess on the outcome?
Yeah, so I have a election watch party lined up with a few friends of mine, very good friends here in Stuttgart, and quite interesting what will happen there. I think lots of beer and perhaps one or other single malt scotch will be involved to sort of cope with the excitement of the night. And yeah, my current feeling on polling is sort of, I don't know, it's weirdly 70-30 for Trump, I think. I'm sort of a pessimist right now. I don't think this will have a good turn of events.
Yeah, I'll do the exact opposite in a way. I'm going on holidays to Tunisia with my girlfriend, and I'll be very happy to switch off, wake up the next morning and see how much or how little progress they've made in the night actually on counting. And we'll be, in a way, hopefully happy, refreshed on the result themselves. I'm actually expecting a Trump win, but that he can't get both houses. And then the drama begins because we will have a lot of legal warfare going on, and we'll have the discussion what the presidential executive powers are and what they are not.
Yeah, at least some positive news on your side. And yeah, I wished I could do the same, but I think I really have to follow the live ticker. So I'll be probably locking myself into my room and following closely the evening and what is gonna happen. And yeah, I will just hope for the best. I really like the US. I like the Americans. They are really jolly people, and I think they do not deserve this polarization that is going on right now. So I've been today at the haircutter and tried to actually talk about like what is coming up next week. And the lady, she didn't even want to talk about it, saying, like, over the past years, like, it's been always not a good idea to talk about politics. You make yourself so many enemies, and I think this is really not a good state of the situation. So I wish the best to the American democracy. And I think for this, as you suggested, Marco, it would be good if whatever outcome we're going to have on Wednesday or the next days, that it's not going to be super tight. Because I think this is the biggest danger for US democracy, that you don't have a definitive result by the morning of November 6th. And, a hanging outcome that actually stretches over several days, because in some municipalities the votes are not counted yet. I think this, could actually open Pandora's box. And I think in this regard, I hope it's going to be a comfortable win for the Democrats at the end.
Is it also your prediction, or is it just your hope?
It's my hope.
Okay, let's leave it at that. So that's the end of our second special episode on the US election, and also a second episode in English only. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back with a live election update actually on the early morning of Wednesday next week. Leo and I will take to the mic while Marco is enjoying himself on the beach, and we'll report a bit on what the election results have brought in over the night. Thanks for listening, and see you next week. Bye bye.
Des Pudels Kern, der Podcast.